We've all heard the stories about Bigfoot. It is perhaps the most popular creature story out there, and why wouldn't it be? The idea that a giant beast, an evolutionary anomaly perhaps, that stands 8 or 9 feet tall and is out there wandering in the wilderness, is intriguing to say the least. And it would change the very way we view everything we know about how humans came to be, if in fact a Bigfoot were ever found. It can be hard to believe that something like that exists, and I think we all understand why. I mean, where's the hard evidence after all this time searching? But what if I told you that on the other end of the spectrum, there are actually creatures that stood around 3 feet tall, and they roamed the jungles of a European island? They might not even be human, yet stood on 2 feet and even used tools to hunt. And the most wild part of all is, not only is there definitive proof of their existence, but they actually could be roaming the earth right now at this very moment. Hidden among the forests, much like the famed Bigfoot, this is the insane story of the mysterious tiny humans of Flores. In the heart of the Indonesian archipelago, which sits between the large land masses of Asia and Australia, lies an island that time seems to have almost forgotten, Flores. Shaped like a dragon's spine, as the locals describe it, Flores is a land of extremes. Volcanic peaks pierce the clouds, and their slopes covered in misty rainforest. Deep valleys cut all through the landscape, hiding countless caves in their limestone walls. And this is a land where the ordinary rules of nature don't seem to apply, because this place is more than just another tropical island. It's a living laboratory of evolution, where isolation has created some of the strangest creatures here on Earth. For example, the world's largest lizard, the Komodo dragon, rules the lowlands here. A true modern dinosaur that can grow longer than a car. They kill their prey by biting them, sending their poisonous saliva into the animal's bloodstream. And from there, it's just a waiting game, and the dragon will follow the doomed mammal for days until finally it falls over in agonizing pain. In the treetops, rats the size of house cats scurry through the branches. These aren't your ordinary rodents you find in New York or Paris. These things are giants, having evolved to fill the ecological niches that larger mammals would normally occupy. But it's not just about animals getting bigger here. Till just a few thousand years ago, dwarf elephants called stegodons roamed these forests. Standing no taller than a cow, they were a fraction of the size of their mainland cousins. And so, what you see here is the magic of island evolution. And simply put, when populations are cut off from the mainland, strange things begin to happen. Some animals grow enormous, what scientists call island gigantism. Others shrink dramatically, island dwarfism. Which is why it was fitting that in this land of evolutionary marvels, scientists made one of the most startling discoveries ever in human history. And the year was 2003. A team of archaeologists were excavating a limestone cave called Lang Buao, which translates to cool cave in the local language. Led by Mike Morwood and Thomas Sutikna, the team had been methodically working through layers of earth, hoping to find evidence of early modern humans. However, what they found instead would turn our understanding of human evolution completely on its head. At around 20 feet below the surface, their tools struck something highly unusual. As they carefully brushed away the soil, a tiny skull began to emerge. Naturally, at first, they thought they'd found the remains of a child, but as more of the skeleton was revealed, they realized they were looking at something totally unprecedented. The skeleton was complete enough for them to realize that this was no kid. The wisdom teeth had erupted. The bone growth plates were fused. This was an adult, but an adult that stood just over 3 feet tall, with a brain the size of a grapefruit. Now, some researchers found it hard to accept that such a small-brained human species could exist at all. It didn't make sense in the current timeline of everything we know. And so at first they suggested that the skeleton must have belonged to a modern human suffering from some kind of growth disorder. Doctors stepped in, suggesting that it must be microcephaly, a rare condition that causes an unusually small head and brain. They pointed to the skeleton and said, "This isn't a new species, it's just a sick modern human." And that's all well and good, except for the fact that as they kept digging, they would go on to uncover more than 100 other separate individuals, all unbelievably small, at which point it became irrefutable. And this was no medical condition. The team had actually uncovered a new species of human.
Coming along to hear news of this remarkable discovery. Here we have a creature that was substantially different from modern humans, a totally new species of our genus, living on the planet at the same time as us.
They named it Homo floresiensis, after the island where it was found. And this wasn't just any human ancestor that you could find all over the world like a Neanderthal or a Denisovan. Now this one had taken its own journey and became something else entirely. An adult Homo floresiensis stood on average around 3 feet 5 inches tall. Their brain was roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, about 1/3 the size of a modern human brain. Yet, despite their small stature and tiny heads, they were clearly intelligent. And how do we know this? Well, because around their bones, archaeologists found sophisticated stone tools. This means they weren't just here hoping to survive, they were active in ensuring it happened. Hunting, manufacturing weapons, and thriving in this isolated island environment. They even hunted down those dwarf elephants, the stegodons, showing remarkable coordination between one another.
A pygmy elephant is still a formidable beast. It's about 1/2 a ton, 3/4 of a ton in weight. If you're going to chase one of those things down, you can't do it by yourself. You've got to be acting as a group, a coherent group of people, all communicating well to make sure you fell this beast in one hit.
But here's where the story gets even more extraordinary. Dating of the bones and artifacts show that these hobbit-like people had lived on Flores for hundreds of thousands of years. They weren't some brief evolutionary experiment. They were a successful species that had adapted perfectly to island life. And so, if they lasted so long in a place that provided a stable habitat, one where they had no wars with outsiders coming in trying to take their land or anything like that, well, what happened to them? As it turns out, perhaps they're actually still out there right now. As news of the discovery spread, the scientific world erupted into heated debate. In universities and laboratories across the globe, they argued passionately about who these mysterious hobbits really were and where they came from. And 2 competing theories emerged. The first was revolutionary and almost unbelievable. Some scientists suggested that these tiny humans weren't descended from more recent human ancestors at all. Instead, they proposed that the hobbits were the survivors of an ancient migration out of Africa, perhaps related to much older species like Homo habilis, who left Africa nearly 2 million years ago. Their evidence? The hobbits' feet, of all things. When researchers examined the bones, they found that their feet looked more like those of our earliest ancestors than modern humans, or even Homo erectus. It was as if they had found a remnant of humanity's super distant past, surviving into almost modern times. Other scientists had a different explanation, and they argued that our hobbits were actually descended from Homo erectus, the same species that populated much of ancient Asia. According to this theory, a group of Homo erectus became trapped on Flores and over thousands of generations grew smaller and smaller, the same process that turned ancient elephants into dwarf stegodons. All the while, as scientists and lab coats were arguing about brain sizes and foot bones, the real answer as to what these things were might have actually lied in the local people of Flores who had their own perspective. Because for them, there was no debate about whether small humans could exist on their island. They'd been seeing them for generations. In fact, while archaeologists were still brushing dirt off bones to try and understand who these ancient people were, the villagers of Flores were telling stories about encounters with small, human-like creatures in the forest. Stories that were remarkably consistent with what the scientists were discovering in their caves. And they called them Ibu Gogo, small, about 3 feet tall, hairy people who live in the forest. Now, usually when indigenous people tell stories about mysterious creatures, scientists tend to dismiss them as nothing more than folklore. But something different happened here. The local tales matched up eerily well with what we know about Homo floresiensis, and too well to just be dismissed. You see, the details in their stories were oddly specific. And the villagers described the Ibu Gogo as having long arms, a sloping forehead, and small head, precisely matching the proportions of Homo floresiensis fossils. And they talked about their flat, wrinkled faces and protruding jaws, again, matching the skeletal reconstructions. Dr. Gregory Forth, an anthropologist who's dedicated over 3 decades to studying the people of Flores, found something even more convincing. The local people, as it turns out, had no knowledge of the fossils being discovered when they first told him these stories. In fact, many of these accounts were recorded before the archaeological discovery was ever even made. Forth has collected over 30 detailed eyewitness accounts himself. Some describe the creatures using simple tools, others talk about their distinctive way of walking. One witness even described watching a group of Ibu Gogo carrying their young in their arms, just as we'd expect from a human-like species. These weren't just old stories passed down through generations. They were happening in the present day, with sightings continuing into the 2010s. And farmers reported encounters while working in remote fields. Hunters told of finding strange and small footprints in areas where no children could have been. And keep in mind one thing. The local people don't describe the Ibu Gogo as magical or supernatural beings. To them, they're simply another animal that shares their island, rare and elusive, but very real. Now, I know what the skeptics are saying. If these creatures exist, why haven't we found them? And where's the proof? Well, first, we need to understand just how vast and unexplored Flores Island really is. The island is a rugged landscape of dense forest, deep valleys, and huge mountains. Much of it remains unexplored, especially in the most remote regions. So in other words, it's exactly the kind of place where a small population of human-like creatures could survive undetected. When archaeologists dated the most recent Homo floresiensis remains, they were surprised to find they were only about 50,000 years old. But some researchers now suspect this date might not represent when the species went extinct. It might just be the last time someone happened to die in that particular cave. The vast, unexplored jungles of Flores contain countless other caves, many of them never studied by scientists in any regard. What secrets might they hold? And what evidence might be waiting to be discovered? Before you buy a ticket to Indonesia to search for them yourself, let's take a quick look at another part of the world, the dense rainforests of Central Africa. Because here, living among the towering trees and twisting vines, we find something remarkable. Not a hobbit, though, but something a little bit closer to them. Entire populations of people who are naturally dramatically shorter than average. And these are the pygmy peoples, and their story might help us understand how our Indonesian hobbits could have evolved. In the Congo Basin, where the forest canopy is so thick the little sunlight reaches the ground, adult men rarely grow taller than 4'11". But here's the fascinating part. This isn't some random occurrence. These people have evolved to be short, and for very specific reasons. When you're living in a dense rainforest, being tall isn't necessarily an advantage. Imagine trying to move quickly through thick undergrowth when you're 6 feet tall. It would be kind of tough. On top of that, temperatures in this region regularly soar above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. When you're shorter, you have more surface area relative to your body mass. This means you can cool down more efficiently, a crucial advantage when you're hunting in a sweltering jungle. Also, living in the rainforest means you can't always count on finding enough food. A smaller body requires less energy to maintain. It's like running a compact car instead of an SUV. You can go further on less fuel. And if you look closer into their genes, you'll also discover that pygmy people have evolved differences in their growth hormone receptors than other populations in order to continue being small. And that's all about survival in one of the most challenging ecosystems on Earth.
Soka music mabaka, bon se gwa mwa villa bilo se umba benda ngone, mo bilo ba ya ba tek se benda nesu.
Now think about what this means for our Indonesian hobbits. If human populations can evolve to be this short in just a few thousand years, what might happen over hundreds of thousands of years on an isolated island? On the other end of the spectrum in the Netherlands, you can find something equally extraordinary: the Dutch. They are officially the tallest people on Earth, with the average Dutch man today standing at 6 feet tall. But guess what? Just 150 years ago, Dutch men were among the shortest in Europe, averaging only 5'4". And so in less than 2 centuries, through just a few generations, they've grown by nearly 8 inches. So what happened? The answer lies in a perfect storm of factors that shows just how dramatically human height can change when conditions are right. First, there's the Dutch diet. After centuries of struggle, the Netherlands became one of the world's richest nations. With wealth came an abundance of nutritious food, particularly dairy. And the Dutch consume more dairy products than almost anyone else on Earth. We all know that milk does a body good and helps with strong bones. And then there's their healthcare system, one of the best in the world. When you combine excellent nutrition with top-tier healthcare from birth, you create perfect conditions for reaching maximum height potential. And there's also the natural truth that taller men tend to have more children than shorter men, and it's a perfect example of natural selection in action. And so if human height can vary this dramatically in living populations, is it really so far-fetched to think that a population of very small humans could have survived all this time on a remote Indonesian island? We know they existed because of their bones and that they survived until at least 50,000 years ago, much more recently than many other human species. We also have consistent eyewitness accounts from locals describing creatures that match the archaeological evidence remarkably well. So I would have to say yes, it's very possible. And new species are still being discovered on Flores all the time. In 2016, scientists found a new species of rat that locals had known about for years, but science had never documented. And think about the mountain gorilla. Scientists didn't confirm its existence until 1902, even though locals had known about them for generations. The same story played out with the giant squid, the octopi, and countless other species that were once dismissed as mere legends. And in 2017, scientists confirmed the existence of a new species of orangutan in Indonesia. And look at them. These aren't tiny creatures. They're great apes, our close relatives. And yet they remained unknown to science until just a few years ago. And so then, isn't it possible that something like a Bigfoot is out there, roaming in the dense forests of the northeastern U.S.? We live in a world that feels fully explored, but the truth is, it's not at all. And we can look at any spot on Earth through satellite imagery. We carry powerful computers in our pockets. It's easy to think that there's nothing left to discover. The reality is there are still places on our planet that remain mysterious. Dense forests, deep caves, the ocean, all places where something unexpected could survive, totally hidden from our modern world. The local people of Flores have a saying, The forest keeps its secrets. And while we like to think we have explored our world and know all the answers as to what is here, maybe we can listen to those who know best, who live right there and understand that secrets exist. Ones like the Hobbits of Flores. And that's just the way it is, and will always be, whether we like it or not. So there was the truth about the mysterious tiny humans of Flores. And if you guys like this one, then you might like the movie we made called An Angry Boy about a kid who goes and seeks revenge on a group that did him wrong in the worst of ways. It's free on YouTube and Tubi right now, and links for that are down below. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.